Hello, hello. Welcome to Winging It. Winging It is a show by Oddbird about web design, development, and our approach to solving problems. On today's show, Eric Meyer will talk to Miriam Suzanne and myself about anchor positioning. Eric, would you like to introduce yourself and say a little bit about where you work and what you all do?
Hey there, I'm Eric. I've been working at Igalia for almost 5 years now. You can see, those of you on the live stream can see I'm sporting the merch. Yeah, I'm a developer advocate there, developer relations sort of person, and also a member of the support team. So I get to be support class for those who like online gaming, which is really what I prefer. So I've been doing the web thing for a long time. Wrote some stuff. That's about it.
Great. Yeah, I think the reason I wanted to have Eric on today is that I saw you were working on doing some things with anchor positioning and doing some interesting things, testing the boundaries, finding out what's possible, and I think you have you have a great view of what CSS has been and now what CSS is becoming, and I was very curious to hear some of your thoughts on yeah, what anchor positioning is now, and especially right now. We wanted to talk about anchor positioning because my thought was that right now anchor positioning would be baseline, and a month ago or so when we scheduled this, it was like, yes, that's going to happen. It looked like Firefox was going to release anchor positioning. It released it behind a flag, so it's not quite out there on all the browsers. And then as we've talked about things, we're looking at should anchor positioning be baseline? And I think we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But so yeah, right now, if you want to use anchor positioning, it's in all the Chromium browsers, Safari. It is also behind a flag on Firefox, which is, if you want to quick type that in, you can enable that and try it out in Firefox. But it might be out in Firefox in general as soon as December 9th, I think is their release of 146, and that might have anchor positioning in. And then it's kind of available for people to test and play with, but it's not quite 100% there, in my opinion. And yeah, I'm curious, before we dive too much into that, Eric, what have you been playing around with anchor positioning? What are you, how are you feeling about anchor positioning these days?
I mean, I feel pretty good. What I've been playing around with is one of my obsessions, which is side notes. So there's, in print, you have footnotes, usually at the bottom of pages, or you have endnotes, which I've actually seen a lot more often in recent publications, where you'll have the little superscript numbers, but then all of those references are actually literally at the end of the book, and you have to flip back and forth if you want to know in the moment, like, what is this footnote denoting, which I actually find kind of frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you have a piece of paper, put the footnote at the bottom of the page. It feels a little bit lazy, but anyway, we're not here to fix publication in print anyway. But anyway, side notes. Edward Tufte has advocated for these for a while, where you have wide margins, and then you put your footnotes over to the side of wherever the reference is. So, I see the one, and then literally next to what I'm reading is the note. I've always liked them because they feel to me like the best web equivalent of footnotes, like actual footnotes. And particularly since we've decided over the past while that line length should not be as wide as your browser window, and browser windows are wide now. Like, most content columns now are being constrained, leaving a lot of space on the sides. And so there's room for side notes in a lot of cases. So that's what I've been messing with. But the most, other stuff too. I did a thing where I was attaching a number to a slider, so that when you move the thumb and the slider up or down, you can see exactly what value you're setting the slider to. I think that's probably going to be very popular in scenarios where sliders are needed.
Yeah, I was just going to say that feels like a use case I'm going to want quite a bit.
Yeah, I can see it happening a lot on CodePen too, because they've got that thing where you can like set up little sliders using some kind of plugin that they've got. It's like, yeah, do that. And sure, that sort of thing has always been possible with a ton of JavaScript, or maybe a half ton. But with the anchor positioning, ideally, it will be very simple. Now, in practice, I've run into things where I've said, hey, why does this work the way that it does, or can I make it work the way that I want to? And I think what people are going to run into at first is that the syntax does not feel totally like of a piece with the rest of CSS, which I think is necessary because it's trying to do things that are not really of a piece with what CSS was originally designed to do. So, it's just getting used to it. It's sort of, I felt the same way about gradient syntax, and now gradient syntax is, I can write it by hand, just because I made myself get used to it. I think the same thing will happen here. And of course, people will make little generators, things where you can click on a website and then it will spit out, here is the CSS that you should copy into your style sheet.
And there's
cool.
There's kind of two syntaxes, right? There's sort of two different mental models you can approach it with. Are you referring to one of them specifically, or do you think sort of both of them the same?
Well, which two mental models are you thinking of?
Well, one is the sort of tic-tac-toe board grid placement, where the element you're anchoring to sort of creates the center piece of the puzzle, and then you've got grid lines across, and you can say, position me in one of these 9 areas, and then it sort of does auto alignment within those, and that's one. And the other is the anchor function, which gives you access to the sides of that anchor element, and you can use that inside of the usual positioning, top right, bottom left, or inset.
Yeah. Actually, I really think it's the fallbacks that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, sure, that makes sense.
The fallback syntax is just, there's a lot of @ signs.
There sure is.
not really used to that in CSS. We have a few @ signs here and there. It's like, okay, at this whole thing, and this is like at. So, yeah. But even beyond that, part of it, I think, is just getting used to, all right, what are actually the edges of the anchor, which are not always, I mean, most of the time, it totally makes sense. If you're anchoring to a div, like the edges of the anchor, the edges of the div, it's not terribly hard to figure out. But there are some cases, like with the slider thumb. It's like, okay, I'm anchoring to the handle, but where actually are the edges of a handle, which is a whole other show and a much deeper conversation. But yeah, I think it's things like that, and sort of getting used to, all right, if I want this thing to do this, what do I actually need to anchor it to? Like, where is the best anchor for that? And because you can have 2 or 3 or more anchors, like you can align to a bunch of different anchors, it takes a little bit. So like with side notes, as an example, you want to put the side note so that, let's say, its top is aligned with the top of the little superscript in the text, but then you also want it to be to the side of the content column. Well, that's 2 different anchors, and you just sort of have to work through, all right, this goes to this thing's top, but then this left goes to this thing's right side, or right to left, whatever. Yeah, it can be a little, wait, hold on. I've got multiple things moving, and I need to keep track of them all in my head. And I mean, maybe for you youngins, that's easier, but
And I don't know if this is jumping ahead, but in the demos I've seen you building for side notes, you're talking about even more anchors than that. Like you're anchoring to the thing, you're anchoring to the side, and then you're also checking if there's other anchors and sort of anchoring to the one that's farthest along.
So
the
you don't want side notes to overlap.
Right.
Like you don't want them to do this. So you have to say, okay, well, the top of this should be aligned with the top of my reference or a little bit past the bottom of the previous note, whichever one is lower. So you're combining anchors in maxes and, now it's verging on Lisp programming because you've got so many nested parentheses.
Yeah.
But you can get there. I've run into some weirdnesses. This is one of the issues that I've run into doing that specific thing, right? So I have a thing where I want to choose my anchor based on where other things are laid out. And I can't know ahead of time where they're going to be laid out necessarily. So I need to sort of say, okay, I want to do this or this. And that referring back to the previous side note doesn't work for the first side note because there are no previous side notes. And so I ran into a thing where until someone reminded me of the comma fallback value, I was doing a thing where the first side note had its own anchor value with no max function. And then everything after that was a max function that had a couple of anchors in it or whatever. And then someone mentioned, oh, hey, if you just do this, anchor or max blah, comma blah, then it works. I'm not still entirely certain why the values that I came up with do work because it seems like they shouldn't have, but I think I'm starting to work it through. Whereas basically you have a max and you say when you're looking for the previous, so you're basically referring to the anchor name that is the previous side note. And if there is no such thing, then that value is invalid and the entire max function becomes invalid at computed, whatever it is, IACVT or VCT. I don't know. It's a thing that the CSS working group runs into quite a bit these days where, well, the author tried to do a thing and that would make sense, except some part of it is invalid. And so the whole thing needs to be thrown out. Like that's just how CSS works. So I was running into that. And I think if I remember correctly, the way it works is max the top of my anchor or the bottom of the previous anchor. But if that doesn't exist, then fall back to 0. And then I'll get the max of 0 and right. So that makes sense, but it took time to sort of work through to why is this not working? Why is it breaking? This should, I think we all go through when we're learning new CSS is I did the thing and it seems like it should work to me and it doesn't work. So CSS is broken, which I've done enough times now that I can say, hold on, CSS probably isn't broken. It's just you're not accounting for all of the use cases that the working group had to account for when they came up with all of this. And then eventually you sort of push through and I was like, oh, okay, right. I need a comma 0 here. And that clears it all up. Great.
Yeah. And that invalid computed value time behavior has been around a long time because of it's part of variables.
Yeah.
But now like you're saying, it's part of most of the new features.
Yeah.
And I don't think people have learned it. I don't think anybody's really been teaching it.
I think you're correct.
I've been I have a new talk that I've been giving about it. So we'll see if we can help change that. But
yeah, I'd like to see that
learn
talk.
this.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I think you're right that there's a lot of new syntax, and I think it's interesting that you were able to, I think it's maybe novel or a new thing for CSS for you to be able to kind of walk through declaratively, okay, I want this to be on the left side of this, or I want this to be below this, and whereas before you're having to do that in by running some JavaScript, and there was a little bit more indirection, I guess. It wasn't quite as declarative, but you're right. It is, you have to learn how to declare and also think through what you want to declare in the first place. It's a lot.
Yeah, and I think what people will learn probably pretty quickly as people start to, both use anchor positioning and write about anchor positioning and publish examples of anchor positioning, people just sort of absorb, oh, right.
Mhm.
If I'm doing this, then using this pattern is the best way to go.
Oh.
Kind of like we did with grid, Fluxbox, everything else. So
yeah, I'm curious if this is, I mean, it feels like a huge feature to me. I mean, you don't, there's so much accounted for. You can, the position try fallbacks, you can do the at rules and do exactly what, or, override the margin or something like that. But then you can also just do like flip block, which you have to learn.
Oh,
but
you can
yeah,
just do flip block where you tell it, oh, just flip yourself over.
Yeah.
In like
and it works.
2 words.
Yeah.
And it works.
Yeah. It feels like there's almost like a surface level, maybe not a surface level, but like there's a there's like this, maybe an iceberg is a good analogy, where there's this little bit on top that is, it's there, it's solid, it works, but then to account for all the other use cases, there's this huge amount underneath the surface that can really get overwhelming really quick.
It's a good description of CSS generally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a fractal iceberg. CSS itself and every one of these new features are like the fractal icebergery.
Yeah. Yeah. I think let's talk a little bit about some of the things that are still kind of getting ironed out. Some of the things that we've run into. One thing, Eric, that you ran into on the slider. Let's see if I can quick share this. Let's see. Where does fallback happen? And I think, oh yeah, here we go. So
yeah.
This is one of the things that you ran into. You're talking about should this, when you go back, should it now turn back over to the left side, or where does, as we're talking about all these fallbacks, where does this happen?
Yeah, I thought this turned into a really interesting discussion. So if you if you slide it all the way over to the right, then it flips, okay? Because I don't want it to go outside of its containing box. Here, of course, there's room, but let's just assume that this, there's something over on the right side that shouldn't overlap, or it's the edge of the browser window, whatever, right? So it is flipped back. Okay, then when you slide a little bit left, should it, now that there's room for it on the right, which is where it started, should it go back? Or should it stay on the left like it is until you go all the way to the left and then it flips back to the right? So this actually got into an interesting discussion, I thought, where there were people saying, I don't want things jumping back and forth when I just make a little change. Like it's a little jittery, might pose some accessibility problems. But then there were other people who were saying, for every position, the rendering should be consistent. So if the thumb is in a position where there's room for the thing on the right, it should be there. And I can see both of those arguments. Like I was like, oh, okay, yeah, you make a good point. Oh, so do you. Yeah, those are both good points. Right now, as people can see from this example, browsers are doing once it is flipped, it stays there until it is forced to move again. Or once it is moved, sorry. Once it has moved from its initial position, it's fallen back. It just stays there until it encounters a situation where it needs to fall back again. And I can accept that. It makes sense. The other one makes sense too. But
I think I like that in terms of it not jumping around as much, but it does surprise me a little bit that browsers went for it. I feel like they're
Mhm.
often opposed to things that are stateful, that like you get into a state and then it stays there, and it's not sort of predetermined by the layout.
Yeah, it is a little unusual, and I sure hope it doesn't turn into a fingerprinting vector, which I have no idea how that could be, but I also have no idea how any of the other fingerprint vectors work until someone like discovers and explains them, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, good point.
Yeah.
Like it totally makes sense now that we don't have visited styling because that's a huge fingerprinting vector. But before the moment that someone explained it to me, I would have, that was actually the first time that I went, what are you talking about? CSS is a security risk. We're just drawing things on a screen. Well, yeah, now I know better.
Yeah. I think with this, I want to be able to decide. I'm fine with the default, but it would be nice eventually if there was a way to say I wanted to, be, well, I would say be stable, but both ways are stable in different ways. And it's also interesting because this is the opposite of a lot of JavaScript implementations of anchor positioning. I think, if I understand right, that like floating UI or it will flip back optimistically as soon as it can. So it's a little bit of a deviation from that. So that's another reason why I was surprised that it went with this this way. But yeah.
You could sort of imagine something in between where you say, well, to get stability, let's not let it flip back and forth at a pixel. Let's have it, so let's separate where it flips back from where it flips first, just so that there's some more space between them so that you don't get a jumpiness right around the single pixel mark. But if you do move far enough back, there is some point at which we'll flip back. I don't know.
Yeah, I could see that too.
But then you have to decide exactly what that value is, and that gets.
Or you have to have support for stops and easing functions and stuff like that in the syntax. Which, who knows? Maybe we'll get there. Like I'm not saying that that's impossible. We're nesting everything else, so nothing could really stop us from that. But yeah, I suspect that there, unless some sort of implementation barrier comes up or is raised, I suspect that we will in the future have at least some control over which behavior do you want. How fine-grained that is, I don't know. But
and Kizmar H saying that it's probably, or I think Chrome's position was that it was easier to implement as well. And I hope that we'll get a way to control this for sure. Yeah.
That's what the browser makers always say. Oh, it's just easier to implement this way. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you have to do it the hard way, guys. But again, this is, like I say, both approaches made sense to me, and I could easily accept either. So anyway.
But another similar example that I ran into with containing block. What happens when your positioned element is outside of the containing block? So this is what it looks like in Safari currently, where this orange part is the positioned element, and it gets shifted inside and covers up part of the anchor. Currently in Chrome, the anchor stays clean, but the positioned element gets moved outside of the containing block. And in this case, it's overflow is hidden, so it gets cut off. Which when overflow is not hidden, it's a little bit of a it's not as big of a deal, but definitely when it is hidden. But it seems, my understanding at least, is that this is a Chrome bug, and they're going to make it so that it actually will behave like this as well. But here's another case where it would be great if you could say, in this case, I do care I think there is some safe alignment that you can work with, but it would be nice if you could say,
is this safe versus unsafe alignment? Is that what's happening?
I think that's probably some of it. Yeah, I mean, part of it here is that well, so anchor positioned elements are absolutely positioned. Right?
Yeah,
the anchor is actually just setting their top right, bottom left, or start, block start end, inline start end, but they are absolutely positioned. So they have no conception of anything else except whatever you give them. So in this case, for example, I would think it should be possible to make the blue important element, or whatever color that is, be an anchor, and the containing block be an anchor, and then the orange element has its left set against the left edge of the large containing anchor, and its right edge not allowed to go past the left edge of the blue anchor, right? So like there are ways that you could potentially work around this, but because these are absolutely positioned things, this is always going to be a risk. This is where I, once again, and Miriam probably knows where I'm going with this because she's heard me say it so many times before, say exclusions, people. We need CSS exclusions. I've been saying it for years. Rachel Andrew agrees with me, so I know I'm right.
I'm not going to argue.
No. Where we could say for the blue thing, exclude other things. Don't let other things overlap me, in effect.
Yeah, I mean, so exclusions were originally discussed as part of regions.
Yeah.
And so there's another thing there that comes to mind for me, which is like when we're doing side notes, say, is absolute positioning really the model that we want for side notes? Something more region-like would allow you to put the side notes into some sort of flow potentially, but I don't know if then you don't get the alignments that you should. So yeah, I just keep wondering about that. Like to get this positioning, we're taking things out of flow, and that means we need more positioning, more anchors, more things to align to sort of rebuild flow. But we have flow. Maybe we should have a solution that uses flow.
We need more flow. More flow, people. Yeah, the aside notes that I was writing about on MyRoweb recently are more, I think, that where being able to take a little piece of the content and put it in its own sort of adjunct flow and then jump back, that makes sense. If you're doing footnotes more like bibliographic citations, then you can go either way on that one. I think, but yeah, I mean, maybe we got fragmentainers or whatever they're calling them now, Franken fragments. I don't know. And maybe there's room there, but the example we were just looking at actually reminded me of another thing that I've been running into, which is a lot like, well, I mean, like I said, anchored positioned things are absolutely positioned things, which means their containing block really matters. And one of the things I run into from time to time with my anchor positioning is that I forget where my containing block is, and then the thing doesn't lay out anywhere near where I wanted it to be. I'm like, what? And then eventually I have to sort of work my way back through the tree and be like, oh, right, I said position relative here for this other reason, but now it's interfering with what I want to do with my anchor positioning. And that's an inherent limitation of the way that anchored positioning works. So there are properties, or there is a property, I'm not super familiar with it, that lets you sort of set the containing scope.
Anchor scope lets you say limit it to this subtree, but that's a limiting factor, not not an escape. If you're wanting to escape, you can use fixed position, but that has a few other caveats and things like that. I think Roma pointed out that Art was doing some work with fixed positioning and anchor positioning, and in Safari, it's very it's flickers. It's very jarring. So they're still working on some of those things, but
Yeah, there's going to be, I think there's going to be a fair amount of that, because we are now blending different types of positioning and other things. And there's just going to be painting problems, most likely. Like you said, in this case, Safari's, something's flickering in and out because for whatever reason, it's being painted on this frame and then not painted for the next frame. And it gets weird. But I mean, you can do that with quite a few other pieces of CSS if you're not careful. Hovering, for example, if you're not careful with hovering or whatever, it's like, well, I hovered it and then it moved and now it's no longer being hovered. So it's back, but now it's being hovered again. Yeah. So exactly. Their fixed positioning was flickery, like Roma's saying in the chat at first. And there are some bugs. Like I found a bug last week before, something like that, recently, where I could use anchor positioning, not even very complicated anchor positioning, to literally crash Firefox tabs. So it got filed. I didn't file it. Somebody on the Firefox team filed it. I contributed some more observations. It's been resolved, and a fix will appear, I would assume, before they come out from behind the flag. But, it's just, in this case, it was, they were dividing by infinity or something. I don't remember exactly, but that happens if you go down the wrong calculation path. You might come back with something that just breaks everything else, and that's what happened here. And it was, to be clear, it wasn't like a super common anchor positioning type thing, because if it were, someone else would have found it before I did. But I just happened to run into it, and so those sorts of things are getting fixed if they're being reported.
Yeah,
that's always the key thing. Like, report it, give a good test case, ideally one that's not super complicated, and then it's likely to get fixed.
Yeah, I think that's where I've run into a few things. I crashed Firefox. No, I think it was Safari fairly recently, and it's just these. I think that was position try options on a nested popover or something like that, which is, if you're doing a sub menu, you're going to do that. So it's not, but it also shows like the surface area of anchor positioning is so broad. It's really hard to test, like just the complexity and the full breadth of everything you can do with anchor positioning. Or I was running into an issue recently where position try fallbacks was acting differently depending if the positioned element was wider or narrower than the anchor. I think I still haven't quite figured out the root cause of that, but reported it, and hopefully someone else will be able to figure that out. But and then again, it was like, this is in Chrome and Safari. Is it a spec issue, or is it? I think position try unwrap would be
position try shrink wrap.
Yes. It would be great. Another thing that has been kind of an ongoing question is related to popovers, and I think Miriam, you're going to be able to talk a little bit about this, but just to set up the problem a bit, this is fairly common with popovers, where you have a button, and I just have popover target, and I have position area end on this popover, and it opens not on the end. You expect it to open up on the end there, and this is a fairly common thing that people have, as they've worked with anchor positioning for the first time. They're like, why is my popover not working, or why is my anchor positioning not working? And that's just because popovers have a default margin, so you have to remember to, I need to onset it, and then it pops up there, and then it's hard to remember. So there was actually some progress on this at TPAC last week, thanks to Miriam, and there's been a lot of different ways of approaching this problem and trying to figure out, how do we change the popovers, the UA styles, or where does this fix lie? How do we make sure that this popover doesn't have a margin? when we don't want it to. So the happy path for anchor positioning with position area on a popover just works. So yeah, Miriam, do you want to talk a little bit about what that solution was?
Yeah, how did we solve that? I think so. We were looking at various ways to intuit that something is anchor positioned. And I think my proposal in that discussion was maybe that the problem is trying to intuit something, and we should just have an explicit way, one explicit place to check. But I'm trying to remember, because I feel like there was something still automatic about it, and I'm not remembering specifically what that was.
The position anchor was, or the default value was
Oh,
auto.
right.
Yeah.
The default value was auto, and we're changing the default value of position anchor to none.
Yeah.
But you can set it to auto.
Yes.
Okay.
So you would need to set explicitly a position anchor here instead of setting the margin, and you would get the same result.
Yes. Or you could do position anchor, instead of setting it explicitly, you could do position anchor auto, so that it uses that implicit anchor, or potentially, I think, even position anchor implicit. I
think Tab was talking about position anchor implicit, but it seemed like auto is right there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if we need a new word for it.
Yeah.
Same idea.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
We can. Sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. This is one of those areas where I think anchor positioning in general is going to have more of these kinds of discussions, because like Brian said in the chat, what you want is just works, registered trademark, right? But what just works means is going to be different based on who you ask. Just the slider example, and should the thingy flip, when should it flip, is like, which one is just works? And so in these sorts of situations, like, what is the just works value that will just work, and more than any other value that could be considered to just work? So yeah, I can see there being changes moving forward. This is how CSS tends to accrue extra keyword values, because, well, we were saying before, we would really like it so that there's a way to control whether that thumb thing flips, like when it flips. So you add a keyword value of some sort.
Eager or something.
Yeah, eager and lazy, and the default is lazy. And to back up that keyword value, you need a property. And so CSS picks up another property. It's like position anchor, or position fallback eagerness, eager lazy, or like, I'm just making stuff up in this moment, but that would work, right? If everyone agreed to it and the browsers implemented it, then you would have a way to say, when do I want this to flip? And so with these fallbacks, like, should it be auto? Should it be implicit? Maybe we end up, or none, and we pick none because we don't pick implicit, but then implicit ends up meaning something else later. And then there's like implicit dash lazy and implicit dash eager. And that's right. That's how we accrue values, is discovering that, yes, the defaults that we picked, we thought through the cases and we covered 70% of cases. Like, and we don't think we could have done any better, but now we need to let people address the other 30% without having to go to JavaScript. So yeah. So if people are asking how come CSS keeps just accruing more stuff, it's because people want things.
Those darn users, right? No.
Well, developers in this case, but
yes. Yeah. Brian asked, are there any uses in the wild that we totally didn't think of? While the two of you think about that, if there's anything, I'll show a couple that I've seen that are interesting patterns. For instance, this is from Tamani Afif, where I think I've heard it called the follower pattern, where you're using something like hover to to follow your mouse or follow your focus, so that you can show. I mean, it falls back to what is I think active or focused, and then you can see your other things, and it just gives a little bit of a smoother effect by setting your anchor. I think it is. I'm trying to remember how they set their anchor, but yeah, there's there you can follow based on some kind of pseudo class.
Yeah,
it works like that.
Kilian Volkov, who makes Polypane, refers to this as floating focus.
Yeah.
Which following focus, floating focus, whatever we want to, I mean, those are valid terms, but yeah, here's an example of that, of floating focus. And I pointed to something, was it Tamani who did it? I think had done something where like links in a paragraph, as you tab from one to another, the thing would go, the focus ring would go flying. And I actually asked my social media followers, like, it looks cool. It's kind of interesting. It's something we've never done before. What do accessibility folks think? Like, is this something we should be concerned about? And most of the accessibility folks said, yes, it is something we should be concerned about. This is not actually helpful in a lot of cases. It did turn into a little bit of a pile on the author, which was not what I wanted. But I guess I wasn't clear enough to say, please do not pile on and tell this person they're doing it wrong. They're just experimenting. What I'm asking is, now that we have seen this experiment, what do we think? Like, is this a thing that we should do, or is it a thing we should discourage? And at the moment, it feels like it's a thing we should discourage. One of the examples that was given, I don't remember all of the examples, but one of them was someone who zoomed in, right? If they're going from one place to another, like the focus ring just goes like flying off in some weird direction, or comes flying in from some weird direction. And yeah, like the arguments they made sense to me, but they also, because it was just a thing I was sort of idly curious about, I did not cement them all in my head. So I don't want to misrepresent, but there were concerns.
Yeah.
And so those are the sorts of things we're really going to need to think about, and with the side notes, at some point I had to say, but what about on mobile? I probably don't want a side note on mobile, because either they're going to be swiping back and forth, or it's just going to be completely cut off and hidden. And how do you deal with that? I mean, how I dealt with that was media queries, but it was still a thing that had to be thought about. And I think that's going to become particularly true with this, because people are just going to be like, oh my God, I can position this with respect to other things that are in the flow, right? Because that was always the thing. It's like, once you absolutely position it, it's completely out of the flow and will have no regard for what's in the flow. Well, anchor positioning pierces that barrier to some extent. It lets you set edges with respect to other edges. It doesn't let you say, and also don't overlap this other thing, without you explicitly saying, keep your edge from going past this other edge in order to prevent overlapping. So, right. So it's kind of both, right? It doesn't look behind it to see if it's overlapping anything. Like, it doesn't care. But you can set edges the way that we would have done it in JavaScript, right? The way that on the Igalia.com website, there's a few places where all of the titles and all the subtitles are supposed to line up vertically. No matter how long or short the titles are, all the subtitles should, or the descriptions, whatever they are, should line up vertically, which today we would say, sure, subgrid. But at the time it was deployed, there was no subgrid. And so it's JavaScript. And it's just looking for, okay, I have to look through all of these, figure out where all the edges are, and then change some values in order to make these other things all line up. That is what anchor positioning type stuff used to be done in JavaScript. Now we're doing it declaratively with a lot of @ signs. And it's because it will become so sort of accessible in an authoring sense, right? Rather than have to install some JavaScript and figure out what all the various DOM calls or whatever are. There will be, here's some CSS you could just type up, and there's going to be a lot more people running up against these sorts of problems, these questions, challenges of, how do we keep our content from completely becoming a mess that nobody can read?
Yeah.
So good luck.
Can we send someone like Roma on a tangent here? I want to see if somebody tries to reinvent flow using entirely anchor position everything on the page, and then see if you can recreate flow from that.
I feel like that feels theoretically possible. I'm not sure if it would be performant enough.
Sure.
I mean, browsers are super
I don't want
performant.
something good. I want
you want something crazy?
Yeah.
I want something just wacky. Oh no, I'm with you on that. I would love to see it. And Roma's come up with a really interesting pattern using variables, CSS custom properties to not have to say, like for side notes, here's the anchor for side note number 1, and here's the anchor for side note number 2, and like have every single one of those listed in your CSS. The is for, you can call them other things, but it's a really clever pattern, and it's one that I'm messing with. So I used it. In fact, I added, they're not deployed publicly, but I added side notes to the Effects of Nuclear Weapons 3rd edition, which I helped put online a few years ago. And that is actually the thing that I have most wanted to do side notes on. Right, because every chapter actually has footnotes. We did them as endnotes online with a thing where if you clicked on a superscript, it would like slide up from the bottom, and then when you dismiss it would slide down, which is fine. But I just wanted side notes, and now I can do side notes. But and using is, but I originally I was like, wait, having to ID every single one of these reference superscripts and then have a list for every single possible, it's like 20 or 25 whatever things, that can't be right. Oh, is for, right? Roma solved it. That's usually, I just assume that Roma has solved it these days. Whatever it is.
Well, let's give Roma a bit more homework with just some of the other things that that could be or that could be improved with anchor positioning, things that we've run into. Brian suggests MathML could use popover support. I don't. Yeah, that would be impressive. I think some other things, like Eric, like you said, it's kind of unclear what a containing block is sometimes, and I think there's probably room in the dev tools. I've heard browser engineers also saying we need dev tooling to say, like, here's what the containing block is. You can kind of get at it with offset parent, but it's not very clear always, like, what am I anchoring within? And yeah, I think that'll be something people run into. Scrolling is another one where I think you can only scroll, or it will only be scrollable if you or the anchor position element will only scroll if it has a default anchor, so either a popover implicitly or I think position anchor declaration. So that's another thing that I've seen people run into, where it's they try to refer to it in an anchor function and it just doesn't tie to it, or they have two different scroll containers that they want to refer to, and that sadly doesn't work intentionally, because it would to cause some performance issues. I think there's also, I think, Eric, you ran into the anchor or the anchor attribute not working yet, or not.
Well,
it's not.
So Chrome, if I remember, Chrome, in your markup, you can say blah, 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 anchor equals some ID. and then you could refer from your anchor. Basically, that would become the default positioning anchor, and you could just say anchor whatever auto, or I forget what the exact syntax is, but it would take that. And the other browsers don't, because that's not a standard thing. And in fact, when it was proposed for standardization, it got some pushback from the relevant authorities. So it oh wait, am I back? No, maybe.
Now you're back. Am I
Okay, now I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Same here.
Cloudflare US East 1. Sure. Anyway, DNS. It was always DNS.
It's always DNS.
Yeah, what was I talking about?
The anchor attribute.
Oh, right. We're kind of now in a situation where CSS has moved to a point that HTML has not caught up with or kept up with, because HTML moves much slower than CSS does, which is probably a good thing. I mean, Jeremy Keith's pace layers talk can explain better than I ever could why that's a good thing. But it does mean that instead of at the markup level being able to say, so for this element, that's the thing that you should be anchoring against, or is in some way connected. You have to do it from the CSS to, in the CSS, say, okay, this element has this anchor name, and then this other element is going to position itself against that anchor name. This is where we are, and probably will be for a while. We could start using the actual for attribute maybe, but then that you have to convince all of the browser makers and the HTML spec authors to let for be used somewhere other than form elements, and that can take years. Which, again, that kind of pace is appropriate for the markup layer, but it does mean that unless that ever happens, the kinds of things that we want to do with positioning will need to be done in the CSS layer and not sort of be structural.
Are there any other issues that either of you have been running into or seeing with anchor positioning that you wanted to briefly touch on?
No, you had a fun brain teaser the other day with an anchor positioning issue.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if that's an interesting one to look at, but
I can see if I can quick
also
pull.
if Eric has anything.
Yeah.
No, let's see James Poser.
Let's see if I can quick find that anchor. Too many things in CodePen.
The basic demo was a situation where just the flip inline fallback.
Oh, yeah.
So an element was anchored sort of to the left, on the left side of its anchor, and it actually flipped to a fallback that was more overflowing.
Yeah.
And I think that there's an explanation for why that makes some sense, but it's a very strange looking behavior to see something auto flip to a worse position.
Yeah. And this is the one where it's in Safari, it's in Chrome. I don't think the spec intends to do that, but I haven't quite figured out why or what.
I'm not seeing your screen yet. Are you, Eric?
Oh.
No, I see it.
Oh, okay. Just me.
Having not seen your CSS, my guess is that you set them to be against whichever edge, and then you just said the fallback is flip.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that's what it did, right?
Yeah.
As soon as it got to the point, it was like, oh, I can't, there's no room for me here. I'm a flip.
Yeah.
So then, And at least it didn't say, oops, that's worse. Let me flip back. Oh, I need to flip. And then you get more flickering, right?
Well, that's
Yeah.
what's actually under the hood. That's what happens. It actually applies the new, or like it applies the fallback option, checks if it's off screen, and if it is off screen or out of the containing block, then
Okay.
it goes to the next one.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't meet any, then it goes back to where it was before. So yeah, I'm actually
Right,
thinking
but-
it's
sorry.
an off
When you
by
flipped it, I didn't see it go off screen. I only saw it go partly off screen.
Right.
But it's overflowing still.
Sure,
Yeah,
but
but it's not
it's
off
not off
screen.
screen.
Yeah,
Keep
Yeah.
going and make it all the way off screen.
all the way off screen. It
All the
doesn't
way off
back
screen.
in.
Would we know if it flips back if it's all the way off?
Yeah.
Is
Well,
it?
we should.
What
because
is
it
the
still
position of an
presented.
element that isn't rendered?
Oh no.
If an element flips in the forest and no one is there to see. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm not going to try to argue that this is what it should do in this circumstance.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's doing what it's doing because of the current state of the spec.
Yeah.
Yeah, my theory was actually that if you're thinking about all of the space it has from its anchor point, if it's anchored on the left side, that space is getting smaller and smaller as you come in. But if you switch to anchored on the right side, that space is actually quite large. And you've switched to a position that's more off screen, but an anchoring space that is larger and more on screen. And maybe that's the logic going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. And there is that built into the spec with the position try order, where you can say, I want this to be the most whatever. And let me remove that. Yeah, but it still seems like it's missing a check or something in that moment. So I don't know. We'll see where that lands, and
we'll see if Roma has a fix by the time we're done here.
yes. Yeah. Another
there was sorry, I don't remember. Did we talk about transforms? Because I know that was a question that came up.
Yeah, that is a question that was submitted. Let's see, from Burned the Writer. I noticed anchor positioning doesn't work on a translated element or transforms ignored. And I just was checking in Chrome 144, transforms are now allowed. Originally in the spec about a year ago or so, it was transforms were not going to be supported. I think they figured out how they could do that with similar to scrolling, where they could do it in a performant way. So that now in Chrome, it is not in Firefox or Safari yet. So yeah, that will be useful, and I think it will be another thing where, I mean, as people, you're making a little element that you can drag around to see how things fall back or whatever. If you're wanting to translate that and then suddenly the positioned element isn't following, that can get tricky. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of times specs say you can't do that because no one has figured out how. And then ideally over time, you remove those bits with the, okay, here's how this should work. And that does seem like one of those. I mean, it makes sense to me because like transformed elements generate their own like containing blocks essentially, or they generate their own formatting blocks. And so it's always been difficult to do certain things with them in kind of the same way that it's difficult to do certain transforms to them. Like you can't rotate inlines because how is that supposed to work? Or at least you couldn't. I haven't checked recently, but yeah, same kind of deal. And that there was a workaround that I came up with over a decade ago that involved transforms and positioning, but not anchors or some, I don't remember. I just know that there was, or maybe it wasn't a workaround. Maybe it was just one of those things that I was like, okay, if you've ever tried to do this and it didn't work, this is why. I don't have a fix for you. It's just why. Which, some blog posts are like that, where you're just saying, you're probably, you just search for how to do this. When I search for how to do this, nobody could tell me. I figured it out. Now I will tell you, which is, that's how we go. Community, baby.
Community baby.
Community baby. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. The other upcoming feature that is pretty exciting is container queries for detecting fallback. So when you do flip block or flip in line, I mean, if you want a little arrow pointing or to the whatever you're tethered to, that'll be useful for that.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, that'll be, yeah.
Yeah, using anchor positioning to make the arrow point at the other thing is still a thing that breaks my brain. Like conceptually, I get how it works, but the fact that it works at all just breaks my brain.
Yeah.
How are we making that work in CSS? I don't understand. I understand, but I don't understand. It's just that's so amazing to me. Still,
Yeah.
It's a little hacky, but
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a hacker at heart, so cool.
You anchor the arrow to both things. Is that
Essentially
the approach?
Yeah. It's just you have to be careful about containing blocks once again.
Mm-hmm.
So
and once you're able to figure out which fallback you're on, it'll be much easier to it'll remove some layers of hacking, I guess. But the other thing I wanted to briefly touch on is will this become baseline? I was actually talking with the WebDX community group this morning about this. They're the ones who determine or who manage the web features and talk about what is baseline and things like that. And yeah, it was an interesting conversation of, okay, so anchor positioning will be kind of in all these browsers, but is it a production ready? Is it a full feature? Is there some subset of the feature that is going to be fully supported? Or are there enough caveats that we need to say, you know what, this isn't quite ready? They don't have baseline beta. That I think that would be kind of where I would say is there's bugs, there's edge cases, there's there's changes in the spec that haven't been reflected. I think it would be nice to have a baseline beta or play around with it, but check all your browsers and check that things work. But we don't have that. So
there's not even a baseline partial support or anything like that.
There is partial support. I mean, it's just not newly available yet. So it's just showing like this is a partial. It's partially implemented. So I think that's probably where it's going to land. Even once it's out in Firefox, it's probably not going to be a full or baseline newly available whenever Firefox releases. So that's a big question. How do you? Yeah, what do you think, Eric?
I mean, will it become baseline? Yes. Will it become baseline soon? Maybe. Yeah. I think parts of it will become baseline newly available pretty quickly. Whether or not, the whole of anchor positioning is considered baseline newly available.
Yeah.
Hard to say. But the various individual properties that are supported across all three browsers, whatever they are. And maybe there are a few that are not. But I could see, I would think by early next year.
Yeah.
Let's say Q1 26. By the end of Q1, I suspect that anchor positioning will be at least baseline newly available.
And I imagine some of the use cases that we've looked at have fairly simple and direct fallbacks. I mean, I'm thinking of side notes. You fall back to end notes or something like that.
The slider follower, you just put it next to the slider.
And others wouldn't. I mean, if you've got a focus ring, you need to fall back to a real focus ring. And maybe that's one that we're telling people to avoid anyway. But
right. It will have, for the most part, it is a very progressive enhancement.
Yeah.
Sure, you can always figure out something that will completely break if it's not supported and you didn't do your due diligence, but because that's what I'm doing with the effects of nuclear weapons. The online text is I'm literally just taking the endnotes which are at the end of the chapter in the markup, and then putting them up if I know, if anchor positioning is supported. So yeah, it's a very progressive enhancement sort of feature, which those are the best, really. Things like, I don't want to get into a big spicy take, but nested CSS is super cool, but it is in no way progressive enhancement. So I have been using it very sparingly in circumstances where, I can sort of get away with it, as it were. But it's going to be a long time before I feel like I can just sort of natively author it. I'm always going to need some sort of pre or post processor, whatever we're calling those, to turn it into viable CSS for me. Unless it's like inside a supports block for anchor positioning, then sure, right, I'll nest selectors in there because that's fine. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think we've gone through a little bit over our time and through what I was hoping to talk about. So thanks, Eric, for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Always a good time.
Yeah. And do you have, either of you have any other last minute or last anchor positioning things you wanted to throw in there?
Community, baby.
The community baby. Okay. Well, please visit oddbird.net/wingingit to access the links and resources that we mentioned on today's show, or to send us feedback and topic requests. We've heard MathML as a possible topic request, and you can also tell us how you've been using anchor positioning. Also, Miriam, you've been working on a video course. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's coming along slowly, but we hope to have at least parts of it to release early next year. Hopefully getting into not just what are the properties and how do you use them day to day, but also how do they all fit together, and what's the mental model that helps you think of CSS as a system rather than a collection of properties and tricks. So yeah, hopefully that's coming relatively soon.
Great. And you can sign up for updates on our website, oddbird.dev. Eric, do you have anything you want to promote? Anything fun?
Yeah, if people want to find me online, meyerweb.com is sort of the central spot. I'm Meyerweb on most social media. And Igalia.com, my employer. Thanks to them for letting me mess around with this stuff and share it with the rest of the world. And sooner than they might realize, deploy this stuff in production.
Great. I can't wait to check out their site. Yeah, on the next Winging It, backed by popular demand, we will be hosting the second annual CSS is Awesome game show. So stay tuned for that. And if you'd like to support us, please like and subscribe. And if you want more from Oddbird, we invite you to check out our newsletter available at oddbird.dev. Thank you. And remember, best practice is a conversation. So let's keep talking.
Community, baby.
Community, baby.